Released in the fall of 2022, A Knight is Born, also known as AKIB, follows the adventures of an unnamed protagonist, only described as a researcher, as he embarks on a quest to uncover the mysterious origin of ancient texts. The story involves a huge cast with a mix of longtime fan favorites, community members, and original characters, all designed to inhabit and fill the vast world of the Forsaken Lands. AKIB spans across 3 books, each of which is comprised of 4 to 5 episodes fashioned after the original WAGDIE narrative drops, of still images imposed alongside audio theatrics. The earlier episodes are noticeably slower paced with more expository-heavy content. Things really start to pick up in the middle of Book 2, with the use of more stylized music and heightened animation, reflecting an evolution in production value and narrative approach. Each book also had its own interactive component, a social media spaces with live audience listeners, video puzzles for viewers to solve, and even a playable minigame designed to stimulate questing through the Crypt of Da'at. It is not sure whether future books will have similar opportunities or even how many books are left in the entire story. At AKIB's narrative core lies 3 distinct subjects. The aforementioned mysterious texts, formally and collectively known as the appendices of the 17. These are encyclopedic artifacts highlighting the 17 ruling despots of the Forsaken Lands. On a meta level, they act as trait books for the entire WAGDIE collection. Narratively, these distinct volumes were discovered over the course of the 18th cycle by the Lost Pilgrim. The Keepers, 5 clandestine beings of influence and power first mentioned by Icyculus during the opening of the Conclave, or the official community gathering for the WAGDIE world. Each of the Keepers bear a similar yet unique mark, usually on their open palm, although for Peros it lies across his jaw. They resemble letters or some sort of writing. The Keepers themselves call it the Mark of the Keepers. Finally, Piat, a word mentioned only twice in WAGDIE as character traits, Piat's destruction and Seeker of Piat. As of Book 3 of AKIB, a few more things have since been revealed. Number 1. Most historic records of Piat have been intentionally blotted out. Number 2. They are apparently the author or originator of the appendices of the 17. And number 3. The Keepers are directly responsible for their demise. A prophecy of Piat is also consistently mentioned by the Keepers, but there is little to go on as to what this actually is. As information is slowly dripped out throughout the episodes, it would seem the remaining books have a lot of ground to cover in tying the full mystery and separate elements of AKIB all together. The interconnectedness of these 3 subjects means that AKIB is just as much their origin story as it is the unnamed protagonists. Going off the title itself, A Knight is Born, it would seem that it's not so much who he is that is important, but more so who he becomes by the end of the story. The story begins at the Battle of Her Church, with the protagonist narrating his attempt to chronicle the event from a cliff overlooking the armies. A bird he mistakenly identifies as a falcon assists him until it's grazed by an arrow. The protagonist bandages its wing and it flies off later, returning in Book 2 in a fun payoff. As the battle gradually wanes, the protagonist's interest turns to the cabal of the Ouroboros, and he decides to go down the burrow rabbit hole to find out more, eventually arriving at the Basileteca, the Library of the Abyss, where he fails a stealth roll and is quickly discovered by the Worm of the Nameless. The two describe him as a cocksure hermit with a stern, unemotional presence, leaving no room for pleasantries. An uneasy dialogue ensues between the two, involving everything from expository dumps to direct threats. At one point, Worm of the Nameless even pulls out his longbow, Sabthanar, to shoot him for a perceived slight.
Seek his heart.
A bribe with an encampment medallion seems to work for a hot minute, as the keeper pontificates on how he used to be a stalwart scholar, until becoming so jaded in his work that it drove him to embrace nihilism and join the Serpent underground. He reveals his mark of the keepers and confirms the hidden agenda of the group.
Diverse are our motivations, for each piece may exist on its own, yet still only ever be realized as the key to something more.
Eventually, he turns on the protagonist, sentencing him to the yawning pits. After a failed bargaining attempt with one of the Severinacris, and appendices of the 17 that the pilgrim acquired during their separate expedition to the burrow, the protagonist is led away by Glymer, a sentry who happened to be stationed at the Basileteca at that time. En route, he reveals how he is actually a prisoner of sorts himself, having been traded from his kingdom to another to ensure good diplomatic standing between them, only for that kingdom to then be annexed by the scourges of the worm shortly after. His significance and real name, Glepharin, was forgotten, allowing him to climb the ranks that put him in a position to now best escape. The protagonist reluctantly agrees to go along with his plan to access a side exit requiring 2 people. But it's all derailed when they run into 2 Wormlord guards.
Run!
What the?
A thrilling chase ensues, Noxium Alchemist hybrids make a cameo, and the 2 hightail it through the Wormkin shaft, riding a minecart all the way through until flying out of the burrow. The 2 agree to part ways, but not before consecrating their newfound friendship, with Glepharin gifting the protagonist his shield, a relic that disorients non-serpent-aligned foes with its scale emblazoned on the front. It's the first of the protagonist's many gains throughout the story, acting not just as a fun visual upgrade, but representing his growth through these different challenges and trials. They then ride into the sunset. An after-credit scene brings us back into the depths of the abyss, where Axan, the Wormlord Guard, is exiled for his failure by Zuriel Highguard, until he catches the escapees and brings them back. Worm of the Nameless mentions a prophecy of Piat, and that's the end of Book 1. We'll take a look at Book 2 and 3 in a later video. If you found this helpful, give us a like and consider subscribing. We'll see you next time.